Hi, welcome to huntforwine.com.au. We're lucky enough today to have Brian Bicknell from Mahi Wines here to run us through a new range for our first podcast for the site. Take away, Brian.
Okay, so what we're going to look at is just our recent range of wines and just sort of talk a little bit about what we're aiming at in terms of the style of wines. And so we've got a couple of different wines. The first one is what we're doing with Mahi, so just a little bit of background on Mahi. What we're aiming to do with Mahi is to sort of focus on wines that really show their vineyards, and we're not looking to make big fruit bomb sort of styles of wines. We're going to have something that's a little bit more subtle. We're based in Marlborough, and right from the start we've always sort of focused on the single vineyard idea, and then in terms of trying to make wines that really express where they come from. So for the first 5 years we were doing all single vineyard wines. Then we purchased a winery, we got a couple more vineyards, so we couldn't have too many. So we started off with this range, which is our Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and that one there comes from 7 different vineyards. And the idea with this one is it's really an expression of the region. So it's 7 vineyards, 3 of them we handpick, and what we do when we handpick the fruit, we then put them over a sorting table, which is just a slow moving conveyor, which is probably 3 meters long. And the idea with that is that as the fruit comes in they're whole bunches. Every year I get about 500 winemakers apply to work for vintage every year, and we just choose 4. We all stand on the sorting table, sort through the fruit. Anything we don't like, we just compost, and then we put the whole bunches into the press. And I think this is a real key. I'm not sort of trying to say that machine pick is better than hand pick or whatever, but by hand picking you've got a couple more options. So one of them is you can sort, and the other is that you can then, when you put the bunch into the press, the juice hasn't been sitting with the skins because the grapes haven't been split. And so you can whole cluster press, so the whole bunch is in there. And then when the press starts, it's like caviar popping and the juice just runs away. And so it doesn't sit with the skins, which makes the wines a little bit more subtle, and for me, having a longer sort of palate. With this one, we also really aim to have a few more layers of flavour. So we pick a little bit riper, we do the hand picking, we then use a small amount of barrel, around about 10% French oak ferment, and we also do some wild yeast fermentation. And for me, again, just looking to aim, to give a little bit more texture. Then with this one, we sell off all of the press wine, so it's just free run juice, and then we leave it sitting in barrels and on lees for about 6 months, and pull it out and bottle probably just before Christmas. So we're looking for a wine that still is identifiably Marlborough, is a good representation of the region, but it has some structure and is a little bit more subtle, so it works better with food. Cool. And the next wine, so we've got a range of, there's 5 different wines we're going to look at. The Boundary Farm Vineyard is one of our single vineyard wines, and this sort of goes back to why we started Mahi. And with the Boundary Farm, it's a single vineyard wine. We do 3 of them every year, and we make them in exactly the same fashion. So this one comes from a very small north-facing slope vineyard, quite far west in the valley, quite far east, sorry. So the further east you go, the closer to the sea you get. It gets slightly warmer. And this one, the soil is quite high clay. And so what we do with this one, we just go through, we hand pick it all. This is one that really expresses what we've done, what we started Mahi for. You hand pick it all. You then go through, we put it all over the sorting table, and then we make no additions. There's no sulphur, there's no ascorbic, no enzyme, so it's probably the purest you can get it. We put the whole bunches into the press, and then normally, sort of probably 98% of the wines you've drunk, or white wines, the wine's gone off to a tank, you've let it settle, and you've just used the clear juice. What we're doing with this one, the juice just runs straight to barrel, so it's quite murky. It nearly looks like sort of freshly squeezed apple juice, and it just goes straight to French oak barrels. We leave it, and after about 8 or 9 days, the yeast that comes from the vineyard starts the fermentation. So yeah, it just sits there, we leave the barrel down a little bit, it starts fermenting, and instead of one yeast in the ferment, you have about 6 different yeast in the fermentation. And the interesting thing with this is that the best research has been done in Australia, showing that these indigenous yeast or these other yeast produce different enzymes which make the palate a little bit more interesting, a little bit more textural, and a little bit more complex, which is what we're aiming at. So with the Boundary Farm, the Ballot Block, and the Alias, it's not like a Sauvignon or a Chardonnay lover's Sauvignon, but it's a Sauvignon that has a few more depths of flavour. We use it with different food. Like the first one will use much more seafood, fish, that sort of thing, whereas this, certainly my favourite is when it's with scallops, but it's got the richness that can handle sort of lighter white meats as well. Cheers. Time to sip.
They're interesting bottle shapes too. I'm just noticing how beautiful they are.
Yeah, what we do, we really, because sort of, as we've talked about previously, you think about, where your heart is. And for me, if you said the world was divided into 2 things, I think there's people who love Leonard Cohen, and there are people who hate Leonard Cohen. I'm probably more on the lover side. There's people who are more Cabernet lovers, and there are people more Pinot lovers or Burgundy lovers. I'm more on the Burgundy side, which I think is more of a sort of essential, sort of a feeling side to life. And so, yeah, with these shapes of bottles, which is the Burgundy shapes, they're softer sort of feel to the wines, and so we use those for everything except for the Gewürztraminer.